Insecurity and conflict obviously impacts what the business environment is for trade and for economic growth. I mean, I look at the question from two angles. I think the first is obviously when there's conflict in country that impacts, business and trade and business opportunities. Often prolonged conflict also impacts ratings on countries and economies. And I think that's something to be very aware of, the interlinkages between the two. But on the flip side, actually having a strong private sector in country helps to some extent de-risk what is seen as a volatile environment, because we know that when economies are functioning and when trade is functioning, there's much more stronger signals. Jobs are created, incomes are generated, capital moves around differently, and certainly trade flourishes and prospers. So, we've also spoken to a lot of our CEOs globally, and what they say is now more than ever, politics, geopolitics are influencing and impacting business, more than has ever been in the case. So, for us, it's a global call, obviously, from the UN perspective, to really, the cessation of war and conflict is really important around the world. From a private sector angle, it does impact, but we also know that strong and stable economies and businesses can help de-risk some of these conflicts.
And just still talking about de-risking the conflicts, you have also a very important initiative, the Global Africa Business Initiative. A very important initiative, but is there any appetite to invest in the continent?
Gosh, if I was just to measure from our initial convening that we held in September last year in New York, I think there's intense and immense appetite to invest on the African continent. As we know, in the I think it's 2030, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. There's a huge, immense, currently $2.5 trillion GDP potential that stands to grow. The largest consumer market will be here. The most youthful market will be here. So we say if you're not investing in Africa, you're not investing in the right place. I think the issue is to demonstrate how those investments lend towards an equitable and just growth and transformation on the African continent, how we can crowd in more sustainable investments, also mobilize more domestic investment as well to drive forward Africa's growth and development.
And central to this is the issue of energy. We talk about just energy transition in South Africa. Over 600 million Africans, have no access to energy. How do you try to expedite that issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's no sustainable scenario for Africa's growth if we don't have access to energy. In terms of an economic perspective, we need energy to power forward the economies. In terms of a domestic perspective, you need energy for homes, for your subsistence, think about in the education sector, think about in the health sector and in the agriculture sector. So energy is needed. A couple of key things. I think first is, what does the energy transition look like? I mean, many countries on the continent have different trajectories. I think that's the first. Second is, what is access to energy like, in terms of affordability, accessibility, pricing, is second. And then thirdly is, how do we make most of the fact that this is again a continent with an abundance of renewable energy? So the issue is, what technologies do we need to put in place to harvest the best that we can from, electricity, from grid power, from solar, from wind and all of that. There's a massive investment that is needed. We do need to acknowledge that. How do we crowd in the right type of macro investment, but also our own domestic investment?
And I suppose also the elephant in the room will have to be the concerns around corruption. What can the private sector do alongside the governments in the continent in tackling this long-standing problem? Obviously not just peculiar to Africa, it's a global phenomenon, but the ramifications in Africa of corruption are fairly visible.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, around the world, corruption really does contribute to significant leakage from global economies. We're not able to deliver fully on our public good if there's corruption within the system. And certainly, it also crowds out real opportunities for investment as we go along. Corruption is one of the areas that we really do focus on, or anti-corruption rather. We focus on in the Global Compact through our principles, really creating frameworks for companies to have the ability to actually stand up and take a firm stand against corruption and against bribery.